Larkspur Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1882. The plains stretched out before Mason Grant like a sea of golden grass, whispering secrets of a harsh but beautiful land. The 25-year-old cowboy sat atop his chestnut mare at the edge of his small ranch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of amber and rose. His hand unconsciously drifted to the scar on his jawline, a reminder of the night outlaws had murdered his parents 3 years prior. "No room for softness out here," he murmured to his horse. "Just survival and work." Mason's ranch, modest but growing, represented everything he believed in: independence, self-reliance, and solitude. After losing his parents to frontier violence, he'd built walls higher than any fence on his property. The neighboring ranchers called him the young hermit, though they respected his skill with cattle and horses. His philosophy was simple. Attachments were dangerous in a land where death rode alongside life every day. He turned his horse back toward the cabin, which stood alone against the vastness of the Wyoming sky. Mason had built it himself after the attack, leaving the charred remains of his parents' larger home untouched 100 yards away. Some wounds were best left undisturbed. The cattle needed moving to the north pasture, and the day would grow hot. Mason's life followed the rhythms of the ranch, the seasons, the needs of his animals, predictable, safe. Lonely perhaps, but loneliness didn't kill you like loving someone could. "Come on, girl," he said, nudging his mare toward the barn. "Long day ahead." Mason couldn't have known that morning that his carefully constructed isolation was about to be challenged by a visitor who would bring more than just the herbs she claimed to trade. The following afternoon, Mason was mending a fence when he spotted the wagon approaching. Visitors were rare enough to put him on alert. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver on his hip as he stood, squinting against the sun. The wagon was small, drawn by a single dappled gray horse. As it drew closer, Mason realized a woman sat at the reins, her back straight, head covered with a wide-brimmed hat. Travelers, especially lone women, were uncommon on this stretch of territory. The nearest town, Clearwater Junction, was 15 miles east. This visitor had come seeking his ranch specifically. When the wagon came within 30 yards, Mason could see her clearly. She was young, perhaps 20, with amber blonde hair peeking out from beneath her hat. Her dress was practical but well-made, a deep blue calico that had seen better days but was neatly patched. She pulled the wagon to a stop and looked directly at him, unafraid. "Good afternoon," she called, her voice clear as a bell across the prairie silence. "Are you Mr. Grant?" Mason nodded cautiously, not moving from his position. "I am." "What business brings you to my ranch, miss?" The young woman set the brake on her wagon and gathered her skirts to climb down. Mason noticed a collection of bags, jars, and what appeared to be bundles of dried plants in the wagon bed behind her. "My name is Lily Gardner," she said, approaching with confidence that belied her years. "I'm a healer. I've been traveling through the territory trading remedies and medicines." She stopped a respectful distance from him. "I heard in town you might have wild yarrow growing on your North Creek bend, and perhaps we could arrange a trade." Mason studied her face. Her eyes were the clear green of spring leaves, direct and intelligent. Her skin was sun-kissed but not weathered, suggesting she hadn't been traveling the frontier her entire life. There was something about her that seemed both out of place and perfectly at home on the prairie. "Who in Clearwater sent you my way?" Mason asked, suspicious. He rarely went to town, and when he did, he kept interactions brief. "Mrs. Peterson at the general store," Lily answered. "She mentioned you'd broken your arm last winter and said it yourself. Said you might appreciate some proper liniment for the next time trouble finds you." Mason's arm ached at the memory. The break had healed, but not without leaving a constant reminder of his vulnerability when working alone. "I don't need charity, Miss Gardner." "It's not charity I'm offering, Mr. Grant, it's trade." "Fair and square," she gestured to his land. "You have plants I need for my medicines. I have remedies that might serve you well, business plain and simple." Something in her straightforward manner cut through Mason's usual wariness. Business was acceptable. Business didn't threaten the walls he'd built. "The yarrows at the North Creek, like you heard," he conceded. "I suppose you'll want to harvest it yourself." "If you don't mind." "I'm particular about how my ingredients are gathered." She smiled then, and Mason felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. "I promise I won't be a bother. I can see you're a man who values his privacy." Mason shifted uncomfortably, aware he was being less than hospitable by frontier standards. "You can water your horse at the trough," he said finally. "I'll show you to the creek after." "Thank you, Mr. Grant, that's very kind." As Lily led her horse to water, Mason watched her with guarded curiosity. There was something different about this woman, a calm competence that didn't match his preconception of townsfolk. She moved with purpose, speaking softly to her horse as she loosened its harness. "How long have you been traveling alone?" he found himself asking. "6 months now," she answered, not looking up from her task. "Since my grandmother passed." "That's dangerous for a woman." Now she did look at him, her expression a mixture of amusement and determination. "So is childbirth and loving a drunkard, Mr. Grant, yet women survive both every day. The frontier merely offers different dangers." Her response silenced him. Mason realized he'd underestimated her, and the recognition stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. This woman had clearly faced her share of hardship, yet hadn't retreated from the world as he had. After Lily's horse was watered, Mason led her to the creek where yarrow grew in abundance. The white flowering plants spread along the banks, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. "This is perfect," Lily said, her face lighting up. She knelt beside the plants, examining them with the care of someone who knew their value. "They're just at the right stage for harvesting." "What do you use them for?" Mason asked, curiosity getting the better of him. "Yarrow stops bleeding, fights fever, and eases pain," she explained, carefully cutting stems with a small knife from her pocket. "My grandmother taught me it was the first medicine a healer should learn." As she worked, Lily told him about other plants and their uses. Her knowledge was extensive, passed down through generations of women in her family. Mason found himself listening intently, occasionally asking questions that she answered without hesitation. "Your grandmother taught you all this?" "She raised me after my parents died in a fever outbreak when I was 7, Lily said, her hands never stopping their methodical work. "She was the healer in our town back in Missouri. When she passed, I decided to bring her knowledge west where doctors are scarce." The mention of lost parents created an unexpected connection between them. Mason watched as she gathered her harvest, noting the respect with which she handled each plant. "You're welcome to stay the night," Mason offered, surprising himself. "It's getting late, and there's no sense in traveling back to town in the dark." Lily looked up at him, studying his face as if searching for his motives. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her. "I'd appreciate that, Mr. Grant." "Thank you." That evening, Mason found himself sitting across from Lily at his small table, sharing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. The cabin, usually silent except for the crackling of the fire, was filled with the sound of conversation as Lily described her travels through the territory. "Most folks are kind once they understand what I'm offering," she said, "though some places are more welcoming than others to a woman traveling alone." "And your remedies, they work?" Mason asked, still not entirely convinced of her healing claims. Lily smiled. "Would I have customers if they didn't? Word travels fast on the frontier, Mr. Grant. A fraud wouldn't last long." As the evening progressed, Mason found himself talking more than he had in years, telling her about his cattle, his plans for expanding the herd, even mentioning the night his parents died, though he kept the details brief. "Is that why you're out here alone?" Lily asked gently. "Because of what happened to them?" Mason stiffened. "I'm alone because it's safer. No attachments means nothing to lose." "But also nothing to gain," she countered softly. Her words hung in the air between them, challenging the belief that had governed his life since that terrible night. Mason stood abruptly and cleared the dishes, uncomfortable with how easily she had seen through his carefully constructed defenses. "I'll make up a pallet for you by the fire," he said, changing the subject. That night Mason lay awake longer than usual, listening to the soft breathing of his unexpected guest. Lily Gardner had disturbed more than just his solitude. She'd stirred questions he'd long ago buried. Questions about whether a life without connections was truly living at all. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's single window. Mason woke to find Lily already up, a small pot of something aromatic simmering on the stove. "Hope you don't mind," she said, noticing him watching her. "I'm preparing some of the remedies I promised in trade." Mason sat up, running a hand through his disheveled brown hair. "What exactly do you plan to trade me, Miss Gardner?" Lily gestured to several small jars and packets arranged on the table. Yarrow salve for cuts and scrapes, willow bark tea for pain, a liniment for that arm that still bothers you. And this, she pointed to the pot, is a chest remedy for winter coughs. Mason approached the table, examining her handiwork with skeptical interest. The jars were neatly labeled in a flowing script, the contents looking far more professional than he'd expected. "All this for some yarrow?" he questioned. "And your hospitality," she added. "Fair trade, as promised." After breakfast, Lily packed her remedies and prepared to leave. Mason found himself inventing reasons to delay her departure, offering more coffee, suggesting she might want to gather more yarrow, even pointing out a distant storm cloud that posed no real threat. "I should return before the town starts wondering if I've met with trouble," Lily said as she climbed onto her wagon seat. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Grant." Mason stood beside the wagon, suddenly reluctant to see her go. "When do you plan to move on from Clearwater Junction?" Lily adjusted her hat against the morning sun. "I've taken a room above the general store for the summer. There's enough work in the area to keep me busy until fall, at least." Relief washed over Mason, though he couldn't explain why. "Then perhaps I'll see you in town sometime." "Perhaps," she agreed with a smile that reached her eyes. "Or perhaps you'll discover you need more of my remedies sooner than you think." As Mason watched her wagon grow smaller on the horizon, he felt as though something had shifted within him. The ranch that had been his sanctuary now seemed strangely empty, the silence less peaceful than before. Over the next few weeks, Mason found himself inventing reasons to visit Clearwater Junction. He needed supplies, he told himself. The general store might have parts for that broken pump. He should check cattle prices with the buyers who passed through. Each time, he found his way to the small room Lily had established as her apothecary above the general store. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. He began bringing her plants he found on his property that might be useful for her remedies. She, in turn, shared stories of her patients and her growing acceptance in the community. "Mrs. Whitaker's baby came early last night," Lily told him during one visit in late June. "I was up all night helping, but both mother and child are doing well now." "You deliver babies too?" Mason asked, impressed despite himself. "Another skill my grandmother taught me," Lily replied, sorting dried herbs as they talked. "Though I'm no doctor, sometimes I'm all there is between life and death out here." The way she spoke, matter-of-fact yet compassionate, stirred something in Mason. Here was someone who faced the harshness of frontier life not by withdrawing, as he had, but by offering healing instead. During one visit in mid-July, Mason arrived to find Lily treating a ranch hand with a badly infected hand wound. The man's face was pale with fever, his hand swollen to twice its normal size. "Hold him steady," Lily instructed Mason without preamble. "This will hurt, but it must be done." Mason did as she asked, bracing the man's shoulders as Lily lanced the infection. The ranch hand screamed once, then fell silent as pus and blood drained from the wound. Lily worked quickly, washing the area with a strong-smelling solution before applying a poultice and wrapping it carefully. "That should draw out the rest of the poison," she told the barely conscious man. "You'll stay here tonight where I can watch you." After the ranch hand fell into an exhausted sleep, Lily collapsed into a chair, the strain of the procedure evident on her face. "You saved his hand," Mason said quietly. "Maybe his life. We won't know until morning if the infection has truly turned," she replied, though a small smile played at her lips. "But yes, I believe he'll keep the hand." Mason studied her, seeing beyond her beauty to the courage and skill that defined her. "You're not what I expected, Lily Gardner." Her eyes met his, and what did you expect, Mason Grant? Not someone who chooses to face the worst of frontier life every day, yet still believes in people, he admitted. "Perhaps that's precisely why I believe in them," she countered. "I see people at their most vulnerable and their most resilient. It's hard to lose faith when you witness such courage regularly." That night, Mason stayed to help Lily tend her patient. By morning, the man's fever had broken, and the swelling in his hand had visibly decreased. As Lily changed the dressing, her earlier confidence proved justified. The angry red streaks that had been climbing up his arm had receded. "You're a miracle worker, Miss Gardner," the ranch hand said weakly. Lily shook her head. "No miracles, just knowledge, care, and your own body's strength." As July turned to August, Mason found himself drawn to Clearwater Junction more frequently. Each visit deepened his connection to Lily, challenging his belief that isolation was the only safe path. One evening, as they walked along the creek near town after sharing supper at the small hotel restaurant, Mason finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Why did you really come to my ranch that day? Yarrow grows all over these parts." Lily was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Mrs. Peterson told me about a young rancher who'd lost his parents to violence and turned his back on the world. She worried for you, living alone with your grief." Mason stopped walking. "So it was pity." "No," Lily said firmly, turning to face him. "It was recognition. I know what it is to lose family, to feel adrift, but where you built walls, I built bridges." "I thought perhaps—" "You thought you could fix me," Mason said, his voice hardening, "like one of your patients." "You're not broken, Mason," she responded, her green eyes holding his. "You're wounded." "There's a difference." The distinction struck him like a physical blow. For 3 years, he'd defined himself by what he'd lost, by the attack that had left him an orphan and his home in ashes. He'd never considered that his response, his retreat from human connection, was not inevitable but chosen. "I should get back," he said abruptly. "The cattle need checking before nightfall." Lily's face fell, but she nodded. "Of course." As Mason rode home, her words echoed in his mind. "You're not broken, Mason. You're wounded." Could healing be possible without surrendering the self-reliance that had kept him alive? The answer came sooner than he expected, in a form he could never have anticipated. 4 days later, Mason was working his north pasture when he heard gunshots from the direction of his cabin. He spurred his horse immediately, fear gripping his chest. As he crested the hill overlooking his property, he saw 3 riders circling his cabin, firing shots into the air and shouting. Drawing closer, their words became clear. "Come out, Gardner woman, we know you're in there." Mason's blood ran cold. Lily was at his ranch, and these men were looking for her. He approached cautiously, keeping to the tree line until he could assess the situation. The men were rough-looking, trail-worn, with the hard eyes of those who lived outside the law. One man dismounted and kicked in Mason's door, emerging moments later, dragging Lily by the arm. "Found her, boys," he shouted. "Thought you could hide from us, didn't you, girl?" Lily's face was bruised, but her expression remained defiant. "I told you in Laramie, I want nothing to do with your gang, Silas." The man called Silas yanked her closer. "You don't get to choose, darlin'. You patched up my boys after that bank job. You know too much." Mason's mind raced. Lily had never mentioned Laramie or any connection to outlaws. Whatever her past, she was in danger now and on his land. Making his decision, Mason emerged from cover, his rifle raised. "Let her go and get off my property," he called out, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. The 3 men turned, startled by his appearance. Silas kept his grip on Lily but drew his pistol with his free hand. "This ain't your concern, rancher," he snarled. "This woman's coming with us. She's got a debt to pay." "I have no debt to murderers," Lily shot back. Mason kept his rifle trained on Silas. "I won't say it again." "Let her go." The standoff stretched for several tense heartbeats. Then Silas smiled, an expression devoid of warmth. "Boys, seems we found something the healer woman cares about after all." Before Mason could react, one of the other riders fired. The bullet struck Mason's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. His rifle fell from suddenly numb fingers as pain exploded through his upper body. He heard Lily scream, followed by the sound of a struggle. Through a haze of pain, he saw her break free from Silas and run toward him. The outlaws were momentarily confused by her action, giving her just enough time to reach Mason's side. "Please," she begged Silas, who approached with gun drawn. "He needs medical attention. Let me help him, and I'll go with you willingly." Silas considered, then nodded. "Fine, fix him up enough that he won't die immediately. I want him to remember what happens when people interfere with Silas Porter's business." Lily helped Mason to the cabin, supporting his weight as they staggered inside. The outlaws followed, weapons ready. Once inside, she eased Mason onto a chair and quickly gathered supplies from her bag, which had been dropped by the door. "What are you doing here?" Mason whispered as she cut away his bloodied shirt. "I came to warn you," she murmured back, her fingers working deftly to clean his wound. They tracked me to Clearwater. I was afraid they'd find you because of our connection. Mason winced as she probed the bullet wound. Who are they? The Porter gang. I treated one of them in Laramie without knowing who he was. When I realized, I refused to help them further. Her eyes met his briefly. I'm so sorry, Mason. This is exactly why I tried to stay unattached. The irony wasn't lost on Mason. Her philosophy had been identical to his, avoid connections to avoid pain. Yet here they were, bound by something stronger than their separate fears. Enough talking, Silas interrupted from the doorway. Is he fixed? The bullet passed through, Lily reported, applying pressure to Mason's wound. But he needs proper treatment or infection will set in. Not my problem. We're leaving. Silas grabbed Lily's arm, pulling her away from Mason. Say goodbye to your rancher friend. Mason lunged forward despite the pain, but the other outlaws were quick to restrain him. One delivered a vicious blow to his injured shoulder, sending him to his knees. You touch her again and I'll kill you, Mason gasped through waves of agony. Silas laughed. Big words from a bleeding man. Don't worry, we need her alive. Can't say the same for you, though. As they dragged Lily toward the door, she locked eyes with Mason one last time. Stay alive, she mouthed silently. Then they were gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading as the outlaws took Lily away. Mason slumped against the cabin wall, his shoulder throbbing. She had managed to bandage the wound, but blood was already seeping through the dressing. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm him. Then Mason remembered Lily's final words, stay alive. She had come to warn him, putting herself at risk. Everything he believed about safety and isolation had been proven false in the most brutal way. The very connection he had feared had given Lily reason to try to protect him. And now, that same connection gave him a reason to fight. Using the wall for support, Mason pulled himself to his feet. The outlaws had taken his rifle, but they hadn't searched the cabin. Moving to a loose floorboard beneath his bed, Mason retrieved a second revolver and a box of ammunition. His neighbor, old Frank Turner, lived 3 miles west. If Mason could reach him, they might be able to gather enough men to track the Porter gang. But first, he needed to stem the bleeding. Mason made his way to the table where Lily's medical supplies still lay scattered. Among them was one of the salves she had traded him weeks ago, yarrow salve for wounds. With clumsy, one-handed movements, he applied it and wrapped a fresh bandage as best he could. The ride to Turner's ranch was a blur of pain and determination. By the time he arrived, Mason was swaying in the saddle, his face pale beneath his tan. Frank took one look at him and called for his sons. Porter gang, Mason managed to explain as they helped him down. They've taken a woman, Lily Gardner, the healer from town. 3 men headed east from my place. Frank's weathered face hardened. The Porter gang has been terrorizing the territory for months, robbed the bank in Sweetwater last week. He turned to his eldest son. Ride for the sheriff. Tell the others on your way, McGinty, Wilson, the Peterson boys. We'll need every gun. Within an hour, a posse of 12 men had gathered at Turner's ranch. Mason insisted on riding with them despite his injury. You'll slow us down, boy, Frank argued. She came to warn me, Mason replied simply. I'm going. Something in his voice must have convinced them. Frank's wife rebandaged Mason's shoulder properly, and someone offered him a fresh horse. By mid-afternoon, they were following the outlaws' trail. The Porter gang wasn't difficult to track. They were moving fast but careless, confident in their head start. The posse rode hard, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. By nightfall, they had closed much of the gap. They're headed for Devil's Canyon, said Peterson, the best tracker among them. Probably have a hideout there. Devil's Canyon was notorious outlaw territory, a maze of narrow passages and hidden caves where men could disappear for months. If the Porter gang reached it with Lily, the chances of finding her alive would diminish drastically. They rode through the night, pushing their mounts to the limit. Mason's shoulder burned with each hoofbeat, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing only on the miles passing beneath them. As dawn broke, Peterson raised his hand for them to halt. Fresh campfire ahead, he whispered, not more than an hour cold. The men dismounted, continuing on foot. Mason's heart pounded as they crept forward through the brush. Had they caught up in time, they found the remains of the outlaws' camp in a small clearing. The ashes of their fire still held warmth, and discarded food tins littered the ground, but the camp was empty. They can't be far, the sheriff said, examining the tracks. Looks like they left in a hurry. A sound from the trees behind them had everyone spinning, weapons raised. To their surprise, Lily emerged, her dress torn and dirty but otherwise appearing unharmed. "Mason," she gasped, rushing toward him. He caught her with his good arm, relief flooding through him. "How did you escape?" "They got careless," Lily explained quickly. "Silas went to scout ahead, leaving me with one guard. I pretended to be sick, and when he came close enough," she opened her hand, revealing a small cloth bag. "Powdered Jimson weed. My grandmother taught me it could disable a man temporarily if he breathed it in." Mason couldn't help but laugh despite the gravity of their situation. "You're incredible." "We're not safe yet," Lily cautioned. "Silas will be back soon. They have a hideout not far from here." The sheriff organized the posse quickly, setting up an ambush along the trail Lily indicated. Mason insisted on staying with her, positioning themselves behind a large boulder with a clear view of the path. "Why did you come back for me?" Lily asked softly as they waited. "After what I brought to your doorstep." Mason looked at her, really looked at her, the woman who had challenged everything he believed about survival and connection. "Because you were right," he admitted. "I wasn't broken, just wounded, and you showed me that wounds can heal." Before Lily could respond, a warning whistle sounded from down the trail. Silas and his remaining man were returning, their expressions dark with anger. "Where is she?" they heard Silas demand of the empty camp. "If that fool let her escape." The ambush was swift and effective. The posse surrounded the outlaws, weapons trained on them from all sides. Silas reached for his gun but stopped when the sheriff's rifle pressed against his back. "Silas Porter, you're under arrest for bank robbery, kidnapping, and attempted murder," the sheriff declared. "Drop your weapons." For a moment it seemed Silas might resist. His eyes found Lily and Mason behind their boulder, and hatred twisted his features. Then slowly he lowered his gun. As the posse disarmed and bound the outlaws, Mason turned to Lily. "It's over," he said, reaching for her hand. She took it, her fingers warm against his. "Not everything, I hope." The ride back to Clearwater Junction was considerably slower than their pursuit had been. Mason's injury, now properly treated by Lily, still required careful movement. They traveled alongside each other, their conversations quiet but filled with new understanding. "What will you do now?" Mason asked as they neared town. "Will you continue traveling?" Lily was thoughtful for a moment. "I've been thinking about that. The territory needs healers who will stay, not just pass through. People need someone they can count on being there when trouble comes." "You could set up a permanent practice in Clearwater," Mason suggested, his heart beating faster. "There's certainly enough need." "I could," she agreed, a smile playing at her lips, "though I've grown rather fond of visiting a certain ranch outside of town." Mason's mouth went dry. The ranch could use a healer nearby. "The owner has a tendency toward injury." "So I've noticed," Lily laughed. 2 weeks later, Mason stood on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and pink. His shoulder was healing well under Lily's care, though she insisted he avoid heavy work for at least another month. The sound of a wagon approaching drew his attention. Lily appeared around the bend in the road, her hair loose around her shoulders, catching the last golden rays of sunlight. She had moved most of her belongings to a small cabin in town, but spent more and more time at the ranch. Mason walked to meet her, taking the reins of her horse as she brought the wagon to a stop. "I brought supper," she announced, gesturing to a covered basket, "and news from town." "Good news, I hope." Mason helped her down, his hand lingering on her waist longer than necessary. "The best," she replied, her eyes bright with excitement. "The town council met yesterday. They've offered to help me establish a proper doctor's office above the general store. Said the territory needs medical care that doesn't require a 3-day ride to Cheyenne." "That is good news," Mason agreed, genuinely pleased for her. "You've earned their trust." Lily looked up at him, something unspoken in her expression. "There's more. They've offered me land as part of the arrangement, a parcel adjoining yours to the east." Mason's heart skipped, adjoining mine. "They thought it sensible, given how often the town healer seems to find herself out this way," Lily said, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Of course, I told them I needed to discuss it with the neighboring landowner first." Mason took her hands in his. This neighboring landowner once thought the safest way to live was alone, without attachments. And now, Lily asked softly, now he believes the opposite, that we're stronger together than apart. Mason drew a deep breath. Stay, Lily, not just on adjoining land, here with me, as my wife. Lily's eyes widened, then softened. Are you certain? After everything that happened because of me. Because of you, I learned that isolation isn't safety, it's just emptiness, Mason said. You were right that first day. I was wounded, not broken. And you helped me heal. Tears welled in Lily's eyes. Then yes, Mason Grant, I will stay as your wife. He pulled her close, mindful of his healing shoulder, and kissed her with all the emotion he'd once been afraid to feel. When they separated, both were breathless. I came here to trade herbs, Lily said, laughing softly through her tears. I never expected. Neither did I, Mason admitted. But some trades are worth more than others. 6 months later, on a clear spring morning, Mason stood beside Lily before the small church in Clearwater Junction. She wore a simple white dress adorned with wildflowers, her hair crowned with a wreath of the yarrow that had first brought her to his door. As they spoke their vows, Mason thought of how far they had both come from their first meeting. The lonely rancher who believed connection meant vulnerability had found strength in love instead. The wandering healer searching for purpose had found a home where her skills were valued. After the ceremony, they rode together to the ranch, their ranch now. The charred remains of Mason's parents' house had been cleared away, and a new, larger cabin stood in its place. Built with the help of their neighbors, it represented everything Mason had once feared and now embraced: community, connection, future. That evening, as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset, Lily leaned against Mason's shoulder, now fully healed. Do you ever regret it, she asked, opening your door that day? Mason's arm tightened around her. How could I regret the day that saved me, not just from outlaws, but from myself? Lily smiled up at him. To think I only came to trade herbs. And instead, Mason said, kissing her softly, I traded my heart, the best bargain I ever made. As darkness settled over the Wyoming plains, their home stood warm and welcoming against the vast wilderness, a beacon of the truth they had both discovered. That even in the harshest frontier, love wasn't weakness but the greatest strength of all.